This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlon, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Dr. Benjamin Caplan is a licensed board-certified doctor of family medicine and a member of the American Medical Association. For the past 17 years, he has overseen more than 250,000 patients as they discover the health and benefits of medical cannabis. He has also supervised and mentored hundreds of physicians in the United States and abroad. Welcome to the show, Dr. Benjamin Caplan.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Excited to have you here, Doctor. And I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Pretty unconventionally. I happen to learn very actively, and I'm reading like it's going out of style. There's so much literature in cannabis, and you know, the culture kind of thinks that there isn't any research about it, but there is. And I'm kind of acting a little bit like a translator for the general public and for the medical community. And you know, what better way to do that, translate the literature and give it to the public than a published book. And this is, you know, published by Ben Bella, so it's not self-published, and it's distributed by Random House, which is, I think, one of the larger distributors in the world. So I had a whole editorial team lined up against me, making sure I'm sticking to facts and helping people in clearer language. So that's where this book kind of comes from, is me translating what I'm learning so that everybody else can understand.
When did you start getting interested in cannabis as a form of treatment?
I fell into it. I was not personally involved. You know, I, like everybody else, was misinformed that if you consume cannabis, you know, I thought you were going to be on your way to becoming a prostitute or addicted to all kinds of different medicines and drugs. You know, you were bound to be a serial killer or a drug dealer. So clearly I knew nothing. But my patients, you know, the people around us knew that it was working. And I was lucky enough to be, you know, an attentive listener in my clinical office in the suburbs of Boston. And I'd be treating patients and they'd say, you know, doc, I don't need your medicines. I have cannabis. And I'd look at them like, what, are you crazy? What's going on? But I took it seriously, and I went to the books as I was trained to do. And I learned that most of the information we all learned, that cannabis was bad for this, that, and the other thing, is there, but it's also balanced with a lot of other information that says the opposite. So it's a learning journey for me, but my patients really have been my guide.
Yeah, interesting. You know, I grew up in I'm a child of the 80s, right? Hitting the big 50 this year. And, you know, when you know, growing up, when I grew up anyway, like there was, you know, the whole Nancy Reagan thing, you know, just say no. And, you know, it was kind of a blanket thing, right? Just say no to drugs. But it didn't really differentiate, you know, cannabis from heroin, you know, for example. And like you, I mean, I wasn't a stoner. I didn't, it wasn't part of my lifestyle. It isn't really a part of my lifestyle. Although it is, you know, recreationally legal now here in Connecticut, just south of you. But, you know, we grew up thinking that, okay, this is this bad thing. And if you smoke this, and by the way, if you smoke this and listen to Iron Maiden, you're probably going to be a devil worshiper, which I did listen to a lot of Iron Maiden, never once worshiped Satan. So take that, Mom. But yeah, there was a lot of misinformation about it. And I'm curious, like those early conversations you were having with patients, like what was your knee-jerk reaction to them when you were hearing them say, hey, I don't need X because I have Y?
Well, I mean, cannabis is a misinformation minefield. Like, there's so much out there that's negative and baloney. And there's so much out there that's positive and baloney. So you really have to be a scrupulous reader. You have to doubt everything. And that to me is home. I'm a skeptical scientist. And I'm also then skeptical of what the pharmaceutical industry is kind of feeding me and the traditional medical industry is feeding me. So I'm skeptical of everything. I'm a pain at parties. But what that does mean is I can see outside of the box and I can hear people. And what I was hearing from my patients was that they loved that they were in control. It wasn't about what the doctor was prescribing them. It was about they get to choose the medicine that is working for them. Most of the time we have a system that's broken in medicine. Doctors aren't listening to their patients at the very least because there's not enough time for us to spend with patients. But patients aren't feeling heard and they don't feel agency. They don't feel control over their own decisions in their life. And for those of us who are sick, when you're going through the woes of illness, the first thing you want is control. I mean, what you don't have control over is the illness. The solution should be under your control. And we've never really had a medicine like that, where you really could choose what you wanted and get what you wanted out of it. I mean, it's really a groundbreaking treatment. And people think of cannabis like, oh, it's about getting high or about feeling good, because we have this kind of singular mindset about pills that, oh, this is a knee medicine or this is an eye medicine. And it's sort of like so pathway specific. But cannabis is a whole system actor. If you think about exercise, you can work different muscles in your body. You can do different kinds of exercises. With cannabis, you can have stuff that's very localized, only one part of your body, or you can have stuff which is your whole system. You can have things which make you sleep better or make you run around like coffee. I mean, there's so much variability in this whole system actor. It's a different kind of medicine. We really need a new paradigm to understand it.
Yeah, what I think struck me about it, and again, not a lot of personal experience here, but I run, my day job is running focus groups, and I got really interested about 8 or 9 years ago with cannabis becoming legal in many states, and I thought that there was a market there for me to go after. So I wanted to interview people who were who were patients and who were using cannabis to help treat various medical conditions. And what surprised me most was, hey, these were not like your, Jeff Spicoli coming out of a van, Fast Times at Ridgemont High surfer types. It was teachers, it was senior citizens, it was, people who, have a hard time with anxiety or sleep disorders. And they weren't doing it to get stoned. They were doing it to improve their life. And I did this projective exercise where I had them, find pictures that represented life before and life after cannabis became part of their treatment. And it was remarkable. And it really got my wheels turning. Now, it turns out cannabis companies don't want to invest money in market research. So that really never went anywhere. But it was eye-opening for me. And I'm curious, from your point of view, what are the things that cannabis does well? Like, what does it work well for? If you were thinking about like prescribing it for somebody, like what are the things that it really works well at?
Cannabis is a groundbreaking solution for anxiety, for pain, for sleeplessness. It is amazingly effective in ways that we understand. So I'm going to be perfectly blunt with you and clear. Much of what cannabis is doing, we don't yet fully understand. And it's ironic, actually, because as a focus group leader, you're sort of in the trenches hearing what's working from people on the ground. And that's kind of how the whole industry is operating right now. That it's kind of he said, she said, and I think this, and my friend did that. There's not much clinical research that is about patient efficacy and outcomes. And that's part of what I love to do. And that's part of what I've done, creating organization out of the data that I've collected over many years from the patients I've seen. I'm starting to understand what people are doing, how they're doing it, when they're doing it. I'm kind of creating structure from the chaos. And to your question, it is working for so many different kinds of things that it's actually starting to not only enhance, but replace medications with cannabis therapies. So people who have illnesses are finding it either helpful or as a really good add-on to other medicines. And it's getting rid of things like opiates. I mean, we've all heard this is a big deal. It's a huge problem. People are dying because of it. Why are we not, as a culture, thinking about cannabis and listening to the people who are saying, look, I don't need 10 pills after my surgery. I'm fine with one. And I hear that very line, that patients who have gone into surgery and they're given these, massive bottles of pills, opiates, they don't need them. That's revolutionary. That is amazing. And the culture really isn't paying enough attention to it.
Yeah, not to mention there's no opiate-induced constipation.
Exactly.
Which I know my brother personally suffered from,
Yeah.
towards the end of his life. But all right, so tell me about the process of writing this book. What when you sat down, when you decided that, hey, I'm going to turn my knowledge and my research into something other people can use. Assuming you have never written a book before, what was the process like?
It was daunting because there's so much out there that I think people deserve to hear. And then I have the sort of privilege of hearing every day. I mean, I have patients, families of kids who are very, very challenged or dealing with, kind of terminal illnesses or severe behavioral illnesses. And the parents will tell me things like, cannabis saved me from institutionalizing my child, or cannabis stopped my child from injuring themselves, making themselves bleed. And if you think about that as a parent, oh my God, I mean, that's like, what could you possibly hope for that's better than that? I mean, it's absolutely breathtaking. So I have these stories that I'm hearing, and, I could have put a compilation of stories together, and I have collected quotes over the years, but that's not so interesting. And I think the doctors out there, the professionals who need to hear this stuff and need to really see this for what it is, aren't going to take that seriously enough. So this book ended up being a mishmash of so many different ideas and goals that I had. One goal for the Doctor Approved Cannabis Handbook was explain this industry. It's so confusing, and there's so much hoopla and glare and baloney out there. How can I translate this so that everybody understands? And then another core mission, which is the second half of the book, is there are concrete therapies that I can guide people with. I can tell people what types of products to buy, how much of those to take, and how to change that routine over time. I have the recipes because I'm seeing these people directly in my office over years, so I know how it works over time. So I want people to understand it. I want people to have a guidebook to be able to sort of use it like a recipe, but I also want to give it a human face. I mean, in the cancer chapter, I talk about specific cases I've seen, and then now families. Some of these patients I have should have died years ago, and somehow they're still hanging on, and they have children who have the same cancers that they did. And those children I'm treating, and they're still surviving. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And I feel like a crazy person just talking about it, but it's so exciting. And I have such an amazing window. I had to scream it, and finding the widest audience I could, had to be publishing.
Right. So what pushback, if any, have you received?
Initially, everybody thought I needed like an intervention. Like I'm a normal, non-quacky doctor. I'm board certified family physician working in the suburbs of Boston at elite hospitals, and I'm doing cannabis. What's wrong with you? But as I said before, I don't see things the way normal people do. I see things differently. I see what needs to be fixed, what's missing. So pushback I've received is almost daily. But clinicians think that this is not a serious science. And that's partly because they're not reading the serious science, which isn't really fair. But a shocking statistic, over 90% of published medical journals are read only by the author themselves and by their editors. Like most publications are published and not even read. So when new stuff comes out, how do clinicians learn about it? How do they engage with patients? Well, mostly these days with cannabis, it's about the patients talking about their experience. Hey, doc, I don't need your stuff. I'm doing fine with cannabis. That's the way I learned. But also doctors have to learn from other professionals. And they're not going to learn from Dr. Google, like Googling things. Doctors are going to learn from someone who's been through the trenches like them, who can see patients and be treated seriously like them. So I do a lot of communication with my colleagues. And part of what medicine is involves pushback. I mean, if you think about it, we've had pendulum swings in the field of medicine around vitamin D, around how much salt is okay. You know, do we eat raw meats? Do we eat cooked meat? Should a meat-only diet be good? Like all these diets and things, doctors have opinions, and we swing back and forth as we learn more. So part of my job is pushing against the pushback. Like, yes, cannabis is a new science, but also look at the amazing good it's doing. We have real patients who are suffering terribly. Medicines that they've tried aren't working. The specialists that they're seeing aren't working. And cannabis is. I mean, don't we have an ethical obligation then to take it seriously? Like, if it's causing less harm and it's giving patients more benefit, what the heck? We have to take it seriously.
Yeah, but then it threatens a whole other industry out there, doesn't it? Right? I mean, so then
More than one.
Yeah,
Sure.
but certainly more than one. But there's one that spends a lot of money in advertising. You can't
That's right.
You can't watch any day part of TV and not see something with a lot of side effects listed at the end of the advertisement. So yeah, I'm sure there's that's definitely, I'm sure, a battlefield. But also to the criticism of, hey, there's not a lot of research on this. Well, how could there be if it was like federally, illegal to do studies using cannabis for the average the average researcher? I imagine that doesn't help things.
No, you're right, and you're wrong. It is, for the average researcher, it is tough because you have to apply to get a DEA license. You have to apply to get some other licenses. But anybody can apply for those, and it's actually not that hard to get them. And dedicated researchers will get them and have gotten them. So it is possible to do research, and it has been done forever, really. The research behind cannabis goes back probably 12,000 years. I mean, we've been consuming this as a species for as long as we have archaeological evidence. So cannabis, without question, is the human plant, in the same way that bamboo is the panda plant, or eucalyptus is the koala plant. This is our plant. If you crush a seed and look under a microscope, you're going to see the exact proportions that we require from omega-6s, omega-3s, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, even some minerals. It is 100% what humans need. That's pretty dramatic, and it's hard to ignore. But if you're a scientist, if you're a doctor, you're probably not paying attention to that stuff because that's maybe not in your wheelhouse. But I love seeing the full picture. And instead of looking under a microscope and saying, you know what, cannabis slows down sperm, therefore it must be bad for fertility. I take a bigger perspective and I look at, what are the countries that have cannabis access? What is their fertility? And if you look at those two charts, which, by the way, are publicly available, you'll see the countries that have the most cannabis have the most fertility. And the countries that have prohibition around cannabis actually have lower rates of fertility. So I'll leave the audience to listen and come to whatever conclusions they think.
Yeah.
But it is not the conclusion that I draw, meaning cannabis is bad for fertility. That's not a sign I'm seeing from a certain perspective.
Are there some forms of cannabis that are safer than others? Because now, I mean, you go to a dispensary, and I've done, research again, market research, and there's things you can vape, there's leaf you can smoke, there are gummies you can take, there are elixirs, there's a number of different ways of kind of getting into your system. Are there some that are better than others?
Yes, yeah, of course. I mean, if I'm walking with you down the pharmacy aisle, you probably don't want to take a Band-Aid into your throat. If I'm walking down the vegetable aisle, I probably wouldn't suggest smoking that broccoli and spinach. Like, there's certain things that you do with medicine and certain things you don't. The entire cannabis industry, through human history, I guess, has decided smoking is the way to take cannabis. That seems like abuse to me for the poor plant. There's a lot of juice in there. There's a lot of meat and potatoes, some good stuff about cannabis that just gets incinerated when you're burning it. It's really all about chemistry in my mind. Cannabinoids, terpenoids, these compounds inside cannabis, have boiling points, just like steam on your stove boils at 212 Fahrenheit. Certain components of cannabis have temperature where they start to boil. That temperature is not 2,000 degrees. And when you're burning cannabis, that flame is 1 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, the realistic perspective is actually you're also heating up the stuff that's farther from the ember or farther away from the flame. So there's a spectrum really of heat. I'm making an exaggerated claim kind of on purpose. But the point here is if you vaporize cannabis, you're collecting humidified molecules and they're coming into the air and you're breathing them in. You're not breathing in elemental carbon, ash, soot, tar. You're breathing in elements that are more pure, and your body can tear down those pure elements. Your body can't break down carbon. That's why we see people with coal miners' lungs, because they're breathing in coal, which is elemental carbon. That's why we see smokers with smokers' lungs. You don't get so much of that with vaporizing, although vaporization of cannabis has its own downsides too. You know, a couple of years ago, we all heard about VapeGate and people were dying because of what they were inhaling. Look under the hood, see what's really going on. Manufacturers of cannabis on the street were putting in products that they would Google and say, oh, this is clean to use with cannabis. Things like vitamin E acetate, vegetable glycerin, other kind of additives, which are safe for topical use. Vitamin E acetate is in lots of creams, but it doesn't belong in your lungs. So what we saw when we looked at people who had died from EVALI is fat globules in their lungs, stuff from the vitamin E acetate that just didn't belong in the vape in the first place. But that stuff, that bad stuff, never happened from products that were sold at regulated dispensaries. So yes, there's stuff which is bad for you. I mean, I think most people know smoking is bad for them, and yet we do it anyway. But there's also stuff which is clearly just bad for you, you know, made poorly, and that's illegal and kind of should be.
Okay. But things like, it says like vaporizing it better than smoking leaf. Things like gummies, things like seltzers. Any points of view on those?
Sure. So the picture gets increasingly complicated as you kind of widen your lens. Anything you're eating gets absorbed in different ways. You actually have a sneaky system in your digestive tract that pulls in nutrition-rich products. Oils and fats are nutrition-rich, so your body actually has a way called the chylomicron system that pulls in fats for quick absorption. For some things, you get to access to the good stuff very quickly, but your stomach and your digestive tract are also very long, and so it can take a long time to absorb. So there's a kind of process here, as you can start to hear, that's different from inhaling. Inhaling, you get to the lungs, you get to blood vessels that are kind of longer and larger than an entire tennis court. But when you're eating something, it takes longer to absorb. There's a different kind of mechanism of absorption. You have different effects. So even the same product will not act the same way, depending on the method of consumption. So it's not just as simple as which is good and which is bad. The same thing, I suppose, would be true if you were smoking your spinach versus eating it. We just don't know about that because nobody smokes spinach. But that's one of the cool things about cannabis medicine, natural medicine, is that we're starting to learn about paying attention to nature. And actually, there's a lot of good stuff about plants. You know, the presence of vitamin D, the presence of vitamin C in some cases. You know, we're starting to learn that plants are nutritious, that they're good for us. And cannabis, for all of the hoopla around THC, is basically just a natural pharmacy. Like, there's so much in this plant, and no matter how you're taking it, you're getting some of that good stuff.
I mean, this is a loaded question and probably one that we don't have enough time to answer, but how does it work? I mean, what's the mechanism of action to make it effective?
I mean, I think as long as we have another 27 hours, we can cover that pretty succinctly. No, the cannabis works because it mimics stuff that we're used to seeing. Our body is built of locks and keys. And when you consume a lock that matches a key, you have an effect. So cannabis, like when we think about THC is is a key, get my analogy straight, which matches a molecule in our body that we're all born with called anandamide. When you point at your friend and they're that happy-go-lucky kind of woman, you know, they're just constantly happy no matter what goes wrong, they're always feeling happy, you can probably interpret that as they have a high endocannabinoid tone naturally. Maybe they have a lot of anandamide floating around. You can think about it that way. And then you point over here to your friend who consumes a lot of cannabis. And boy, they seem pretty uppity, and maybe uppity is the wrong word, giggly, happy, friendly. And there's a similarity here. And so what cannabis is kind of representing is an alternative to what some people have naturally, because not everybody is that happy-go-lucky. Of course, we all know the Grump and the Scrooge. And those people could be described as having an endocannabinoid deficiency. They can't have a good day, or they can't have a pain-free day because their body is just oriented differently. You know, just like a professional athlete has different musculature than you and I, these people have a different endocannabinoid tone, different endocannabinoid system. And just like you and I can exercise and start to get stronger and maybe jump higher, some people have a choice to take an outside product, cannabis as a plant, and be able to supplement that system that might be underactive.
So what you're telling me is that if Ebenezer Scrooge just had access to some fairly good cannabis, you know, and whenever it was the 1800s, you know, 19th century England, you know, he could save himself a lot of trouble. You know, doesn't need to see Marley's ghost, doesn't need to be visited by the three spirits. It would have saved him a whole bunch of trouble.
I think he probably would have seen those spirits anyway, depending on which cannabis he was smoking.
Fair enough.
But yes, no, point taken.
Fair enough. You know, I'm curious, you know, because I am very interested in cancer, and I did kind of mention, you know, my brother's passing a little bit earlier. He did die from lung cancer, and you know what I'm curious about with cancer patients is, you know, how should they be thinking about cannabis as part of their treatment?
Sure. I mean, I to be clear, I'm not a quacky doctor. I'm not a quacky cannabis doctor either. I don't think it is the cure-all. I don't think it's the be-all. Cannabis, when supplemented with traditional pharmaceuticals, chemotherapy for cancer, seems to work better in every way. So the big picture, someone is more able to tolerate the chemotherapy. They live a happier sort of existence. They have a more pleasant death if that's the path they're on. And some people seem to get wildly lucky, and they don't succumb to the cancer. So it's very hard to say cancer is a cure, because the scientist in me says, well, we don't have enough evidence, but we do have a lot of evidence, anecdote, and experience with patients that shows there's something very special here. And you know, one of the things we were talking about before we jumped on air, I did a newsletter where I covered 33 mechanisms by which cannabis helps prevent, treat, manage cancer. Those are there out for the reading and investigation. So we have the starting materials. We don't know why and what's working specifically, but there's no question in my mind that this is essential and groundbreaking.
You know, one way that I'm thinking about it in my head is, of course, it's not going to cure your cancer. It's not going to treat your cancer, right? It's not going to fight it, but it might give you the ability to tolerate what you're going through more. And if it does that, then, you know, maybe you won't lose your will as easily. Because I do think that there are people, you know, who are going through treatment who in their mind say, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. You know, they want to give up the fight. And when you make that decision, that's when things start to take a turn. But if this is something where, you know, it helps you tolerate what you're going through more, and maybe it gives you a little bit more optimism. Again, it's not shrinking tumors, but you know, maybe
it is actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I see now that I need you to correct me on that.
So what you did was a beautiful bunt, but let's aim for a home run.
Good.
And let's talk about angiogenesis. That's the creation of blood vessels, new blood vessels. When we're walking around, we have a balance between making blood vessels and not making blood vessels. When you have a heart attack, one of the blood vessels to an area of your heart gets blocked and you have heart tissue that dies. So you have to revascularize. You have to create new blood vessels to be able to feed that area. In that case, creating new blood vessels is pretty important. For healing, new blood vessels are good. If a small cancer puts out a signal, says, hey, blood vessel, come over here. I want to grow. Blood vessel growth in that case is not so good. You and I create about 5,000 cancers every day. Every single person walking and talking out there creates cancers every day. That's why we have a T cell immunity system. We are constantly battling errors in cellular reproduction. When cells grow and they're messed up, if they grow too much, we got to kill those cells. That's what your immune system is for. Your immune system keeps those 5,000 new cancers in check pretty well. Most of us survive 60, 70 years without cancers. Most people over those older ages have a waning immune system. It's hard to keep that up over time. And those older adults tend to get cancers more often. Part of that is this balance of angiogenesis. Cannabis, like all of nature and vegetables and fruits, pushes against angiogenesis. So as people consume high doses of cannabis or vegetation, vegan diets, for example, come with less cancer. Those people get fewer cancers. Those small cancer cells don't have enough power to be able to pull a blood vessel to them and grow beyond what they can be fought.
Yeah, so thank you for correcting me on that. That's amazing, and just that statistic of each of us creating 5,000 new cancers. What'd you say every day?
It's humbling.
That is humbling, and I'm slightly freaked out.
No, don't be freaked out. I mean, the math is in this newsletter post I have. I lay it out explicitly because I don't speak the speak without backing it up. That's one of the nice things about this book, is that there are 119 claims. Because every single claim in the book is backed with a reference in the back. This is not doctor says. This is pointing to the scoreboard. The literature is out there. I organized it so that everybody can understand and fight with the same evidence I'm learning.
One thing that I'm also curious about is this idea of, not the idea, but the notion of recreational use versus medicinal use. Do you have a point of view on that, or do you delineate between the two, or?
No, I don't. I think it's all therapeutic. You know, the kid who's smoking cannabis because he wants to socialize, the grown-up who's consuming cannabis after a hard day of work, those are still therapeutic. I think culture has come from this judgy perspective. As a puritanical culture, we all kind of grew up thinking, that religion is right, that we shouldn't have medicine which tastes good. We shouldn't feel happiness when we're in the medical process. This is all kind of engineered over time to keep people down. I mean, it sounds conspiratorial when I say it, but the fact is, recreation is still healthy. Laughter is really a good medicine. And I can't tell you how many patients I've seen where just feeling a little bit of joy at the end of their life would be enough. And yet they're stuffed with pills and they're made to feel absolutely nothing, no pain. They can barely move. I don't know how many people spend the end of their life or with a family member who's dying and they can barely communicate with them. That shouldn't be what we're dealing with. We should all have the right to a pleasant life and a pleasant death. And especially someone who's suffering through a chronic illness, whether it's pain or cancer or just everyday tremendous anxiety and panic. Why is that okay? Why do you have to have an option which is being snowed out of your mind, non-functional, out for the count, or, suffering? And cannabis, is a small natural medicine, but so much in there helps people bridge that gap.
Yeah, we have this notion, don't we, that pleasure equals sin. And even though, I know that the stats and the number of people who identify with any particular, organized religion is, is declining, there's still this notion, this hangover we have about pleasure equals sin. And that's something that we certainly need to change.
Totally. And I think we are as a culture. It's funny, just today, there was an article published about rescheduling, and cannabis all of a sudden will be subject to advertising. We haven't had cannabis really advertising in papers and journals and TV. Is that a good thing? A lot of people, my phone was ringing today. Is this a good thing? And I think our culture is not really ready for mainstreaming cannabis as much as it is kind of mainstream behind closed doors. We have statistics now that more people are consuming cannabis than alcohol, but that's probably been true for a long time, but people have been shy to talk about cannabis because they felt judged. But we live in this culture that just doesn't allow people to feel happy. It's really kind of sad. Somehow it's okay to be overworked and underslept, but take vacation and people are starting to judge you.
Sure.
And that's changing, hopefully.
And I do know, I mean, just anecdotally working, in the marketing industry and having had clients who are in, the wine business, the beer business, the spirits business, they are seeing the younger generations, 21 to 30 are not consuming alcohol the way the prior generation has. And they're scared. They're scared to death about it. I know people in my family who own, liquor stores. The COVID was very good for them, but things are becoming softer. And again, of course, we're in a state now that has recreational cannabis, so behaviors are changing.
Yeah, no, for the better, I think. There was some study about alcohol saying, a couple drinks was good for you. And those have come under increased scrutiny lately, showing, wait a minute, actually, we read the science wrong, that it's actually not good for you. And any clinician worth their salt will tell you alcohol is toxic for most of the organs in our body. We like the feeling of it as we sort of go into that state of toxicity, but it's not healthy and it causes a lot of long-term damage. So cannabis replacing alcohol is a good thing by almost any measure. I don't feel too bad for the alcohol industry. They've done pretty well. But also a lot of them are wisening up and investing in the cannabis industry.
Yeah.
So I think as the paradigm shifts, as people realize that health is really important, that we want to have healthier lives, I think there will be a place for alcohol and there will be a place for cannabis. They can both coexist.
Yeah, I remember being in college taking an allied health course, and it was right when research around, hey, 2 or 3 glasses of red wine or 1 to 2 glasses of red wine will help lower your cholesterol. And then I think that that those studies were funded, I think, by the French wine industry. So it's like
no, they were supported by it, yes. But actually, one of my early mentors was an author on the study, so I know it pretty well. And it was there is some truth to. When your liver is busy processing alcohol, it is not busy producing cholesterol. So there's some science that makes sense there, but the public health data, the bigger picture, just doesn't add up.
Yeah. Very good. Well, where can people pick up the doctor-approved cannabis handbook?
So everywhere books are sold. This is literally international. Amazon, of course, has it, and that's probably the fastest way. I've seen some used copies, so there's enough out there. I think I've heard 10,000 copies in print now. So Amazon is probably the best bang. There's an audiobook now, which is, thank God, not my voice. It's a professional narrator. That's out there too. Somehow someone's producing a CD from it too, and that's legit sold. So there's an audiobook. There's a Kindle app, of course, for people that prefer digital reading. And actually through my websites, I have signed copies. I'm still small enough fry that I care about personalizing messages to my audience. If anybody wants a personalized copy, it's on my websites. You can go to Caplan Cannabis, CAPLAN Cannabis, CANNABIS.com. I'm also all over social media. So anybody that wants to learn more and doesn't want to pay anything, A, you can go to the library because my book's there, but B, I'm happy to teach and share every day as I do on social media.
Very good. I will be sure to put a link to all of your websites, including the CED Clinic, BenjaminCaplan.com, and CaplanCannabis.com, as well as all your socials in our show notes. So if anyone's listening, you can just tap on your phone screen and find Dr. Caplan that way. And I will say, Dr. Caplan, thank you so much for stopping by and letting me uncork your story.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the time, and I hope other people find this helpful, and looking forward to more discussion in the future.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlon uncork a new story.